My name is Marin. I'm 35, and 3 days after I delivered my daughter, my mother-in-law stood in the middle of my hospital room and announced to everyone present that the baby wasn't family. She was cradling Luna like a question she'd already decided the answer to. Then she turned to a room packed with Caldwells and said it loud enough that the nurse's station could hear every word. "This baby can't be our blood." My husband's expression went flat. My sister-in-law folded her arms and let a small smile surface. And me, still sore, still in a thin hospital gown, still fumbling my way through learning how to nurse, I did the one thing that unsettled them more than any tears would have. I smiled right back. Because I'm a genetic counselor. 12 years of reading what blood actually has to say. And in 10 days, a doctor would walk through that same door with an answer not one of them was prepared to hear. But let me take you back to where it started. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Stories, where everyday women face impossible moments inside their own families and walk away with their dignity untouched. If you've ever been forced to prove you belong to the very people who were supposed to love you without question, this story is for you. Leave a comment below and make sure you subscribe. Luna arrived at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday, after 14 hours of labor that very nearly landed me in the operating room. Daniel held my hand so hard his knuckles drained white. When they laid her against my chest, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, a thick head of dark hair, he was crying before I was. I'm a senior genetic counselor at Ridgemont Medical Center. What that means is I spend my days walking families through chromosomes when they've just been handed news they never saw coming. I read test results the way other people read recipes, scanning for the part that matters, flagging anything out of place, turning the numbers into something a parent can actually hold on to. I didn't come from money or connections. My mother died when I was 9, ovarian cancer, stage 4, caught far too late. After that, it was just my dad and me in a 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh. He drove a delivery truck. I waited tables to get through community college, transferred to a state school, and worked evening shifts in a hospital lab while I finished my master's. Every single thing I have, I assembled hour by hour. When Daniel proposed, I genuinely believed I was finally getting the thing I'd spent my whole life building toward. Not a house, not a title, a family. A kitchen table where no chair sat empty. A last name that meant somebody was waiting for me at the end of the day. I thought giving birth would lock it into place, that the moment Luna arrived, I'd be a Caldwell in a way no one could ever pick apart. I had that part badly wrong. Diane Caldwell had been sizing me up from the day Daniel first brought me home. I caught it in the way her eyes traveled over my shoes at the front door, the way she'd ask where I'd gone to school, and then leave a pause just long enough to let the silence do the talking. Her late husband, Robert, Daniel's father, had been a county judge. The Caldwells carried a name in that corner of Virginia, the kind of name that gets murmured at church fundraisers and chiseled into hospital wings. Robert had died 3 years earlier, a heart attack at 61, sudden and absolute. After that, Diane became the lone guardian of the Caldwell legacy, and she protected it like a woman who had once been told, long ago, that she herself didn't measure up to it. She wore a single strand of pearls every time I laid eyes on her, cream-colored, flawlessly matched, with a gold clasp shaped like a tiny leaf. They'd been in the Caldwell family for 4 generations, she once told me, handed down mother to daughter-in-law, but only to blood. Only to blood Caldwells. She'd been looking straight at me when she said it. Not cruel about it exactly, just clear. The pearls were never meant for me. They never would be. And Luna hadn't even been born yet, and Diane had already drawn the line in chalk. What slipped past me at the time, because I was too busy defending myself, was a smaller thing. A comment Diane made to Brooke one Thanksgiving while she paged through a stack of old photos. She tapped a picture of Daniel at maybe 8 or 9 and frowned just slightly. He never did favor Robert much, did he? Brooke had shrugged. Diane moved on to the next photo. I tucked it somewhere I wouldn't revisit for months. The first real cut came 4 hours after Luna was born. I was still in the delivery suite, tethered to an IV, fighting to keep my eyes from closing. Daniel had stepped down to the cafeteria. His family swept in like a tide. Diane first, then Brooke and her husband Greg, then Aunt Carol with a bouquet of balloons and her phone already recording. Diane lifted Luna out of the bassinet without asking anyone. She held her out at arm's length, examining her face the way you'd inspect a piece of fruit at a market stall. "She's dark," Diane said. She slid a glance toward Brooke. "Caldwell babies are fair, always have been." Brooke tilted her head and crossed her arms. "She does have an awful lot of hair for a newborn." Carol kept the camera rolling. I lay there in a snarl of blankets and monitor cables and tried to convince myself this was simply Diane being Diane. Old-fashioned, fussy, not cruel, just particular. "My mother had dark hair," I said. "Recessive traits don't move in a straight line. I'll draw you a Punnett square if you want one." Nobody laughed. Diane returned Luna to the bassinet with the same care you'd use putting a borrowed book back on a shelf and said, "We'll see." 2 words, flat, rehearsed, a door clicking shut without ever needing to slam. Daniel came back balancing a turkey sandwich and a grin. "Did everybody get to meet her?" he asked. Brooke nodded. "We met her." I watched Diane run her thumb over the pearls, smoothing them. She didn't look at Luna again for the rest of the visit. That night, after everyone had cleared out, I held Luna against my chest and felt the thin plastic of her hospital band press into my collarbone. Tiny letters. Caldwell. Luna. Proof of who she was. I don't talk much about my mother, not because it hurts, though it does, but because when I tell people I lost her at 9, they fill in a softer version of grief than the real one. The real one was eating cereal alone at 6 in the morning while my dad was already out on his route. The real one was learning to braid my own hair from a YouTube video back in 2004, when the resolution was so rough you could barely make out the fingers. When I married Daniel, I wasn't only marrying a man. I was marrying the idea that my daughter, whoever she turned out to be, would have more chairs at her table than I ever did. Grandparents, aunts, cousins who'd show up for recitals and bring a casserole when someone fell sick. A last name that carried weight. So when Diane looked at Luna and refused to see a Caldwell, it wasn't simply an insult. It was a threat, aimed straight at the one thing I'd spent my entire life trying to build, a family without any gaps. I stayed awake that night staring up at the ceiling tiles, counting the little holes in them because counting was easier than crying. Luna slept in the bassinet beside me, her hand curled into a fist no bigger than a walnut. Her ID band caught the blue glow of the monitor. Caldwell. Luna. I read it over and over like a prayer. Tomorrow I'd go home. Tomorrow I'd set up the nursery, wash the bottles, wrestle with the car seat. Tomorrow I'd start proving to Diane that Luna belonged. And I hated that I even thought proving was the right word for it. The text started 2 days after we brought Luna home. They came in through Daniel's phone, but they were aimed at me. Diane had a gift for that, saying things to her son that were really meant for his wife, the way a pitcher throws to first when the real runner is on second. "Just checking in, sweetheart. Has she been sleeping all right? You know, newborns can get fussy when the home feels unsettled." Then, an hour later, I was talking with Carol and she mentioned something interesting about genetics. "Did you know features can skip whole generations sometimes? Or come from somewhere unexpected?" LOL. LOL. 64 years old, and she signed off her accusations with LOL. Daniel showed me the messages because he thought they were funny in a sad sort of way. "She's fishing," he said. "Just ignore it." I tried, but the next morning a new one landed. "I'm not saying anything, Danny. I'm only saying that in this day and age, it's wise to be sure. There's no shame in certainty." I wanted to fling his phone across the room. Instead, I went into the nursery and reorganized Luna's onesies by size for the third time, because organizing was the closest thing I had to screaming. Around then, I started noticing the gaps. Daniel's cousin Patty stopped liking my Instagram posts. His Aunt Carol, who'd always commented on everything, went quiet. Brooke, who in 6 years had never once started a conversation with me, sent a text. "Hope you're resting. New moms need their strength." It read like a greeting card from someone who already knew the punchline. Somebody was talking. I just didn't yet know how many of them were leaning in to listen. I found out what Brooke had been up to on a Thursday. Daniel's friend Kyle called him while I was nursing Luna in the living room. I could only catch Daniel's half of it. "What? Who told you that?" Then a long silence. Then, "That's insane, man. That is absolutely insane." He hung up and sat down on the edge of the couch. He didn't look at me right away. "Kyle said Brooke told Greg's sister that you'd been working late a lot during the third trimester," he said, "and that she thought it was suspicious." "Working late? I'm a genetic counselor at a medical center. I sit with families on the worst days of their lives. Sometimes those appointments run past 5. Brooke had taken the most ordinary detail about my schedule and sharpened it into a weapon. Daniel dragged both hands down his face. "She also told Kyle's wife that Luna's coloring doesn't match the family line." Direct quote. I set Luna into the bassinet very carefully because my hands were trembling, and I refused to be the kind of person who holds a baby while rage builds behind her teeth. "Your sister is calling me an adulteress to your friends," I said. He nodded. "I know, and my mother started it." He didn't try to deny that part either. What made it worse, what made it almost surgical, was that Brooke had never accused me outright. She'd done exactly what Diane had taught her. She asked questions. She raised eyebrows. She mentioned things in passing. The accusation was everywhere and nowhere at once, like smoke in a house where nobody will admit there's a fire. Daniel never doubted me. I want to be perfectly clear about that. Not once did he say, "Is she mine?" Not once did he look at Luna and hesitate. But doubt doesn't have to take up residence in the person carrying it. It only needs to be somewhere in the room. He got quieter. He still held Luna the same way, gentle, careful, exactly the way he had since her very first minute. But something behind his eyes was working, running the numbers, replaying the timeline. "I'm married to an engineer. He solves problems by constructing models in his head, testing the loads, checking where the stress lands. I could practically hear the structure creaking. "Maybe we should just take the test," he said one night. We were in bed, Luna asleep in the co-sleeper between us. "Just to shut them up." "Shut who up?" "All of them." I stared at the ceiling. "So your mother accuses me of cheating, your sister spreads it to half the county, and the solution is I take a test to prove I'm not a liar." He was quiet for a long stretch. "I don't think you're a liar, Marin." "Then why does the test exist?" He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. Not yet. But somewhere in the dark, with my daughter's breathing the only sound in the room, I started thinking like a counselor instead of a wife. A paternity test would prove Daniel was Luna's father. Fine. But Diane hadn't said Daniel isn't the father. She'd said this baby can't be our blood. Our. The whole bloodline. And that was an entirely different question, one I knew exactly how to answer. I keep coming back to that text she sent, the one that set all of this in motion. If someone in your family has ever made you prove you belonged, you already know how that silence feels. Stay with me, because the way this ends is nothing like the way she planned it. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the moment the whole room went quiet. Diane called it a Welcome Luna dinner. She scheduled it for the following Saturday at her house, the Caldwell house, the one Robert built in 1992, the one with the wraparound porch and the dining table that seated 14. She invited everyone, Daniel's aunts, his cousins, Greg's parents, even neighbors who'd known Robert from Rotary. A Welcome Luna dinner. It sounded warm. It was an ambush. I knew it the second I walked in and saw the seating. Diane at the head, Brooke to her right, Carol directly across with a clean line of sight to me. Daniel and I were placed at the far end, near the kitchen, guests in a house that was supposed to be ours one day. The food was perfect. Diane was a good cook, I'll give her that. Roast chicken, green beans with almonds, buttermilk biscuits from scratch. She waited until the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured. Then she stood. She didn't clink a glass. She didn't have to. When Diane Caldwell rose at the head of that table, people stopped breathing. "I want to address something," she said, "because this family has always valued honesty." She looked at me the way a judge looks at a defendant. "There are questions about Luna's parentage. I think we all know that. And I think the right thing, the loving thing, is to settle it." She folded her hands. "A DNA test. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear." 14 faces swung toward me. Daniel's jaw went tight. Brooke was already nodding. Carol had her phone in her lap, the screen angled toward the table. And then Diane delivered the coda she'd clearly been rehearsing all week. No test, no name. That's how blood works. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and set it down. "Fine," I said. "Let's test the blood." What Diane never anticipated was that I'd say yes. She'd built the entire evening around my refusal. The tearful denial, the dramatic exit, the proof by avoidance that would let her tell everyone I had something to hide. When I agreed, her mouth opened and closed like a fish lifted out of water. Brooke recovered first. "Good," she said. "Then we can put this behind us." She said it the way you'd say checkmate, satisfied, finished, already looking past the board. Carol tapped something into her phone under the table, presumably updating whoever wasn't in the room. The cousins shifted in their seats. Greg studied his coffee mug like it held nuclear launch codes. And Daniel looked at me with an expression I recognized from 12 years in genetics. It was the face of someone who has just understood that the test might reveal a great deal more than they'd bargained for. "I have one condition," I said. Diane's chin lifted. "I'll run the paternity test. Daniel and Luna, father and daughter, accredited lab, full chain of custody. But since you said our blood, since this is about the Caldwell bloodline, I want a grandparentage panel too." I watched the word land. Grandparentage. Most people at that table had no idea what it meant. Diane did, or she pretended to. "Fine," she said. "Test whatever you like." She smoothed the pearls. "The truth doesn't care how many questions you ask it." There, I agreed with her. It was maybe the only thing we ever would. On the drive home, Daniel was silent for a long while. Luna slept in her car seat, one fist pressed to her cheek. "You know something," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "I know how to ask the right questions," I said. "That's my whole job." The week that followed was the loneliest of my life. Not because Daniel pulled away. He didn't. He changed diapers at 3 a.m. and brought me water while I nursed and kissed my forehead exactly the way he always had. But a pane of glass had slid up between us, thin and invisible. Every time I looked at him, I could see him running calculations on the other side of it. The rest of the family went quiet in a way that was louder than any phone call could have been. No texts from Patty, no messages from Carol. Brooke sent exactly one follow-up, praying for clarity for everyone, the Christian lady equivalent of sharpening a knife. I didn't cry. That's not a boast, it's a diagnosis. I have a pattern. When things go bad, I don't collapse. I organize. I clean. I sort. I make lists, check the margins, triple verify the results. Because if the data is clean, then the outcome is defensible. And if the outcome is defensible, no one can take it from me. My therapist once called it competence as armor. She wasn't wrong. Daniel tried to talk about it on Wednesday night. We could just leave, he said. Move somewhere, start over. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I was folding Luna's burp cloths into perfect thirds. I'm not proving anything to them, I said. I'm answering the question they asked. There's a difference. He watched me fold for a while. You're scaring me a little, he said. I lined the cloths up by color: white, cream, pale yellow. Good, I said. That means I'm being precise. It came out colder than I'd intended. That's the thing about armor. It doesn't only shield you from the people trying to hurt you, it shields you from the people trying to love you, too. Diane called Daniel every day that week. I heard his side of those conversations. Short, tense, mostly, and I know, Mom, and we're handling it. On Thursday, she changed tactics. She called while Daniel was bathing Luna, and I picked up by mistake. Marin, she said. Her voice was the temperature of a walk-in freezer. You understand this isn't personal. It feels personal, Diane. It's about the family, about protecting what Robert built. If you have nothing to hide, this will be over in a week and we'll all move on. That's what I'm counting on. A pause. Brooke says you were working late a lot toward the end. Every other night sometimes. I held the phone away from my face for 3 full seconds, breathed, brought it back. I'm a genetic counselor, Diane. I sit with families who've just been handed devastating news. Sometimes that runs longer than a lunch break. I'm not accusing you of anything. You're accusing me of everything. You're just doing it in a way that lets you deny it later. She hung up. Daniel came out of the bathroom with Luna swaddled in a towel, her hair sticking up in every direction. Who was that? Your mother. And she's not accusing me of anything. He caught the tone. He sat down beside me and held Luna between us like she was the only thing keeping the room from splitting down the middle. After the results come back, he said, I'm going to need you to help me figure out what to do about her. I know. Because she's still my mother. I know that too. We sat there a while, the 3 of us, listening to Luna breathe. It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt all week. Friday morning, I called my colleague at Ridgemont, Dr. Naomi Hartley. She's a clinical geneticist, board certified, 15 years in, no nonsense whatsoever. We'd worked dozens of cases together. She knew my voice, my standards, my reputation. I told her what I needed: a paternity panel, Daniel and Luna, standard markers, and a grandparentage panel, Diane Caldwell to Luna. A beat. You're running grandparentage on the grandmother. She's the one who questioned the blood. I'm answering the question she actually asked. Naomi understood at once. A paternity test would tell us whether Daniel was Luna's father, but a grandparentage test would tell us whether Diane was Luna's grandmother. If Daniel was confirmed as the father and Diane was excluded as the grandmother, there'd be only one explanation, and it would have nothing to do with me. I'll set it up through GenPath Diagnostics, Naomi said. Independent lab, AABB accredited, full chain of custody. No one will be able to challenge the results. That's the point. Her voice softened. Are you okay? I watched Luna sleeping in her swing, her tiny chest lifting and falling. I'm a counselor who's about to be sitting on the other side of the results envelope, I said. I'll be okay once the data speaks. I wasn't trying to trap Diane. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't planting a bomb. I was answering a question, the exact question she'd posed at her own dinner table. She had said our blood. She had demanded proof. So I was going to give her proof, the kind that doesn't care about dinner tables or pearl necklaces or who built the house, the kind that simply tells the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. The group chat was an accident. Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter on Saturday morning while he ran out to the hardware store for a cabinet hinge. Luna was in her bouncer. I was making coffee. The phone buzzed once, then again, then 5 times in a row. I wouldn't have looked at all, except the preview showed my name. The chat was called Family Matters. Diane, Brooke, Carol, Cousin Patty, Greg. 6 months of messages I'd never seen. I scrolled with the same clinical focus I usually reserve for an abnormal karyotype. The early messages were harmless. Holiday planning, birthday reminders, a recipe Carol wanted to try. But somewhere around my 7th month of pregnancy, the tone shifted. Brooke, October. Has anyone else noticed Marin stays at work until 8 some nights? Just saying. Diane, October. A woman who works that late doesn't have her priorities straight. Carol, November. I don't want to start rumors, but Greg's sister said she saw Marin having coffee with a man at the Panera on Route 9. Probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was a patient's husband. I'd been delivering results to both of them, but Carol had already built the scaffolding and Diane was busy mortaring the bricks. Diane, December. When the baby comes, we'll know. Caldwell babies look a certain way. Brooke, January, the week before my due date. Maybe we should have the conversation at the dinner, all of us, so she can't twist it. And then, buried in a thread from 3 months back, a message from Diane I almost scrolled right past. I don't know why Danny turned out the way he did. He never favored Robert, not once. But that boy is mine, and I'll protect this line. I read it twice. He never favored Robert. The sentence settled in my chest like a coin dropped into deep water, spinning as it sank. I closed the phone, set it back exactly where Daniel had left it, and went back to making coffee. That sentence stayed with me all weekend. He never favored Robert. I'd noticed it myself in a peripheral sort of way. The way you notice a crooked frame on someone else's wall. Daniel was tall, broad-shouldered, with brown eyes and a square jaw. Robert, in every photo I'd ever seen, had been lean and narrow-faced, with blue eyes and reddish hair. Brooke looked like Robert. She had his coloring, his bone structure, his thin-lipped smile. Daniel looked like neither of his parents. I'd always chalked it up to genetics being messy. Which it is. Phenotype doesn't follow a tidy script. 2 blue-eyed parents can produce a brown-eyed child if the right recessive alleles are in play. I knew the science cold. But Diane's message gave it a different weight. She hadn't written, Danny takes after my side. She'd written, he never favored Robert. And then she'd chased it with, but that boy is mine. As though she were arguing with someone. Or with herself. I didn't tell Daniel about the chat. Not yet. He'd want to confront Diane, and a confrontation would only hand her the chance to rewrite the narrative before the results came back. Instead, I filed the information the way I'd been trained to. Clinical note, mental folder. Revisit when the data arrives. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't change how I thought about the test. I'd ordered the grandparentage panel to clear my name. Now I was beginning to suspect it might do something else entirely, something nobody in that group chat had considered, something Diane had spent 40 years not letting herself think about. The swabs were collected on Monday. Daniel, Luna, Diane, all sampled at GenPath's satellite office. Diane arrived in her pearls. Let's get this over with, she said. 3 to 5 business days. Dr. Hartley oversaw the collection herself. She'd worked with GenPath before. AABB accredited, double-blind processing, tamper-proof chain of custody. No one could claim the results had been doctored. No one could say I'd pulled strings. The samples went into sealed kits with barcodes. Diane watched the technicians swab the inside of her cheek with the expression of a woman enduring a TSA pat-down. Dignified, patient, already drafting what she'd say once she was vindicated. "This is the right thing to do," she told Naomi. "For the family." Naomi nodded, professional. She didn't mention that grandparentage panels were unusual. She didn't explain what the results might reveal beyond paternity. She simply documented, sealed, and shipped. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Diane had already phoned 3 people to let them know she'd submitted to the test willingly and expected full vindication by the weekend. Carol forwarded her messages to Brooke with a string of prayer hands emojis. Brooke replied, "She's going to be so embarrassed when this comes back." I read none of these in real time. I learned about them later. The way you learn about an earthquake after the ground has already gone still. Through the aftershocks. Through the cracks other people point out to you. For those 3 days, I poured myself into Luna. I bathed her, fed her, read to her from a book about constellations because I wanted her first stories to be about things that were ancient and dependable and didn't hinge on anyone's opinion. I held her hand while she slept and studied her fingers. 10 of them. Perfect. Mine. Friday morning, my phone rang. Naomi. "Results are in," she said. "Can you come to the office?" "How fast?" "Now, if you can." I put Luna in the car seat and drove. On the way to Ridgemont, I found myself thinking about the night Daniel was born. He told me the story once, early in our marriage, the casual way people swap birth stories, like weather reports. His parents had been living out in the valley back then, 20 miles outside town. Robert had driven Diane to Grayson County General, a small hospital that served 3 rural communities and ran on a skeleton crew after midnight. It was a Saturday night. 2 other women were in labor at the same time. The nursery had 4 bassinets and a single nurse covering the whole floor. Robert used to joke about it at Thanksgiving. Place was a zoo that night, babies crying in surround sound. I told Diane I'd have built her a delivery room at home if I'd known. Everybody would laugh. It was just a story. A funny detail from a chaotic night 40 years ago. But I wasn't laughing now, because I knew, from 12 years of reading the medical literature, from case files, from real families who'd sat across my desk, that hospitals like Grayson County General in the 1980s were precisely the kind of places where mistakes happened. Overworked nurses, handwritten wristbands, bassinets parked side by side in a shared nursery, babies identified by a strip of tape with a last name scrawled in ballpoint pen. Before barcoded ID bands became standard in the mid-90s, a switch could happen in the time it took to change a diaper, and no one would ever know. For weeks, people kept telling me to just take the easy test and move on. I didn't. I asked the one question Diane never thought to be afraid of. 10 days later, that question would walk through a door in a white coat. If you've ever stayed calm while everyone around you was telling you to panic, hit like, and tell me in the comments whether you'd have asked it too. While I drove to the hospital, Diane was already laying plans. Daniel told me later what she'd spent the week doing, calling the family one by one, confirming attendance at what she was calling the resolution gathering. She'd scheduled it for Saturday afternoon in the hospital's family conference room, timed to coincide with Luna's 1-week wellness check. Efficient, practical, a stage dressed up as a doctor's appointment. "I want everyone there when the truth comes out," she told Daniel on the phone Thursday night. "This isn't about humiliation, it's about transparency." Daniel told her we'd be there. He didn't tell her I'd already seen the group chat. He didn't tell her I'd already driven to Ridgemont to sit across from Dr. Hartley and study 2 sets of results. He didn't tell her anything, because by Thursday night, He and I had reached an agreement. The truth would speak in the very room Diane had built for it, but the truth would say something she'd never once rehearsed for. That Friday evening, Diane sent one final message to the family group chat. I didn't see it until much later. Tomorrow, we settle this. I've been patient, I've been fair, and I've protected this family the way Robert would have wanted. The pearls stay where they belong, with blood. I'll be buried in them before I let an outsider touch them. Carol replied with a heart emoji. Brooke replied, Finally, that gold digger gets exposed tonight. Patty didn't reply at all. Luna slept in her crib, one hand open, palm up, as if she were waiting for someone to place something in it. I sat beside her in the dark and listened to the house settle. Tomorrow, 10 days after Diane had held my daughter like a question mark. Tomorrow, the answer. Dr. Hartley's office smelled of hand sanitizer and printer toner. She had 2 folders on her desk, both sealed, both stamped with GenPath's logo and a chain of custody barcode. Luna was asleep in her carrier on the chair beside me. Naomi sat across the desk and folded her hands. She'd put on the face she uses for hard conversations. Neutral, steady, with just enough warmth to keep the room from going to ice. Paternity first, she said. She opened the first folder. Combined paternity index greater than 1 million. Probability of paternity 99.9998%. She looked up. Daniel is Luna's biological father. There is no question. I exhaled. Not because I doubted it. I hadn't, not for 1 second, but hearing it from an accredited lab, in a sealed report, with a barcode and a chain of custody, meant Diane's accusation was now officially, measurably, forensically wrong. Now the grandparentage panel, Naomi said. She opened the second folder more slowly. This is where it gets complicated. I leaned forward. The report was dense. Alleged grandparent, Diane Caldwell. Child, Luna Caldwell. The probability of a grandparental relationship, Naomi said, is less than 0.01%. The room went very quiet. Luna shifted in her carrier. The fluorescent light overhead hummed. I stared at the numbers. Paternity confirmed. Grandmother excluded. If Daniel was Luna's father, and I was Luna's mother, and Diane was excluded as Luna's grandmother, the math left exactly one conclusion. Diane was not Daniel's biological mother. I'd run hundreds of kinship analyses in my career. I'd delivered results like these to strangers, held their hands, walked them through the implications. I had never once been the one sitting in the chair. There are several possible explanations, Naomi said carefully. An undisclosed adoption, donor conception, or, given that Daniel was born at a small rural hospital in the 80s, a newborn identification error. I've already flagged a follow-up panel. If we test Brooke, we'll know whether she shares maternal markers with Diane. That'll narrow it down. She paused. Marin, are you okay? I need to tell my husband, I said. Before Saturday, he needs to hear this from me. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I started the car. Luna slept through all of it. The report lay on the passenger seat like a grenade with the pin still in. Diane was not Daniel's biological mother. The words kept rearranging themselves in my head, hunting for a configuration that made sense. A hospital switch. Grayson County General, 1986. A busy Saturday night, 3 deliveries, 1 nurse, handwritten wristbands. Somewhere in the chaos, 2 bassinets had been set side by side, and 2 babies had gone home with the wrong families. Daniel had spent 40 years being a Caldwell, eating at the Caldwell table, carrying the Caldwell name, being measured against Robert's jawline and Diane's expectations, and none of it was blood. I thought about Diane's message in the group chat. That boy is mine, and I'll protect this line. She had built her entire identity around a bloodline that didn't even include her own son. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. But I wasn't thinking about irony. I was thinking about Daniel. How do you tell a man that the woman who raised him, who packed his lunches and drove him to baseball and sat in the front row at his college graduation, isn't his biological mother? How do you tell him that the blood she'd been weaponizing against his wife and his daughter, the sacred Caldwell line, doesn't run through his veins at all? Not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, not even with anger. You tell him with the truth, the same way you deliver any result that changes everything. Gently, clearly, and with both hands steady. I started the car, drove home, and braced myself for the hardest thing I'd ever done in 12 years of genetics: deliver results to someone I loved. I told him after Luna's evening feeding, in the kitchen, with the overhead light on, because I wanted him to see my face clearly when I said it. No shadows, no ambiguity. The paternity test came back, I said. You're Luna's father. 99.9998%. He closed his eyes, opened them. Okay, he said. Okay, good. There's more. I set the grandparentage report on the counter between us. Diane was excluded as Luna's biological grandmother. The probability is less than 1/100%. He picked up the report. He's an engineer, not a geneticist, but he can read data. He scanned the allele table, the exclusion index, the probability statement. His lips moved as he worked through it. Then he set it down and said nothing for a long time. So, she's not my mother, he said. Not biologically. Biologically, no. Then who? We don't know. Naomi thinks it's consistent with a hospital switch. You were born at Grayson County General. Small hospital. Busy night. It happened more often than people realize. He sat down on the kitchen stool. He didn't fall or stumble. He simply sat, the way a building settles when something in the foundation shifts. I watched him and didn't touch him because I knew from 1,000 consultations that the first minute after a result like this belongs entirely to the person receiving it. You don't fill it with comfort. You let them find the shape of it. She raised me, he said finally. 40 years. Yes. She's still my mom. Yes, but she spent 10 days trying to throw out my daughter over a bloodline that doesn't even... His voice cracked. He pressed both palms flat against the counter. What do we do? We go to the gathering tomorrow, I said, and we let the truth answer the question she asked. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. I found him at 2 a.m. in Luna's nursery, sitting in the glider with the lights off, watching her sleep. He wasn't crying. His face wore the same expression I'd seen on 100 patients' family members, the look of someone recalibrating their entire history in real time. I always felt different, he said quietly. Not unloved, just different. Like I was playing a part everyone else had memorized, and I was still reading off the script. I leaned against the doorframe. Brooke has Mom's eyes, he went on. Mom's hands. Mom's way of pressing her lips together when she's annoyed. I never had any of that. Dad used to joke I was the milkman's kid. He paused. Guess the joke was closer to the truth than anyone knew. Daniel. I'm not angry, I keep thinking about that nurse. The one covering the floor by herself on a Saturday night in 1986. She probably didn't even know. She went home after her shift thinking everything was fine. He reached into the crib and rested his hand on Luna's back. Her breathing didn't change. Mom spent her whole life building a wall around the Caldwell blood, he said, and I was never on the right side of it. He looked at me. But Luna's mine, and you're mine. And that's the part that actually matters, isn't it? I crossed the room and perched on the arm of the glider. That's the whole point, I said. He rested his head against my shoulder. Tomorrow, he said, we walk in together. We let Naomi read the results, and if Mom falls apart, we catch her, if she'll let us. He nodded. We stayed in the nursery until the light came in through the curtains, thin and blue and early. Saturday morning. The gathering was set for 2 o'clock in the family conference room at Ridgemont Medical, where Luna was scheduled for her 2-week checkup at 1:30. Diane had orchestrated the timing perfectly, or so she thought. She'd wanted the results read in a medical setting, surrounded by witnesses, with the full institutional weight of a hospital behind the verdict. She just hadn't expected the verdict to be her own. I dressed carefully, not fancy, a clean blouse, dark jeans, flats. I pulled my hair back, no jewelry. I didn't need armor today. I needed clarity. Daniel wore the blue button-down I'd bought him for Father's Day 2 years ago. He carried Luna in her carrier and didn't say much. We'd said everything that needed saying the night before. On the drive over, I checked Daniel's phone one last time. The group chat had detonated overnight. Brooke, 11:47 p.m. Tomorrow's going to be rough for her. Almost feel bad. Almost. Carol, 12:03 a.m. I always said something was off. A mother knows. Diane, 7:15 a.m. Wearing the pearls today. Robert would want them there for this. I locked the phone and slid it into the glove compartment. Naomi met us at the hospital entrance at 1:20, the 2 sealed folders tucked in a manila envelope under her arm. Are you ready? She asked me. Yes. And Daniel? He shifted Luna's carrier to his other hand. Just tell the truth, he said. That's all anyone can do. We walked in through the main entrance, past the maternity wing where Luna had been born 10 days earlier, past the nursery window where newborns slept in clear bassinets with barcoded wristbands, and turned left toward the conference room, where Diane Caldwell was already waiting in her pearls. The conference room was a rectangle with beige walls, a long table, and fluorescent lights that made everyone look faintly ill. Diane sat at the head. She'd arrived early, of course she had, and positioned herself the way she always did, centered, composed, presiding. The pearls lay against her collarbone like a judge's gavel. Brooke sat to her right, legs crossed, arms folded, wearing the satisfied look of someone who'd already written the ending. Greg was beside her, studying his phone. Aunt Carol had claimed the seat directly across from the 2 empty chairs meant for Daniel and me, giving herself a front row view. She'd brought her phone and a small bottle of water, like a spectator settling in for a matinee. Cousin Patty was there too, wedged into the corner, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. 2 of Daniel's uncles sat near the door, polite and uncomfortable, the way people look at a funeral before the casket arrives. We walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. Daniel carried Luna's carrier. I carried nothing. Diane looked at us, and something crossed her face. Not doubt exactly, but the beginning of a question she hadn't planned to ask. Maybe it was that I wasn't crying. Maybe it was that Daniel looked calm. Maybe it was that Dr. Hartley walked in behind us in her white coat, carrying a manila envelope, and took a seat at the far end of the table without a word of introduction. Thank you all for coming, Diane began. She didn't wait for us to sit. This is about family, about truth, and about protecting the legacy Robert spent his life building. She turned to me. Her chin was up. Her hands were steady. The pearls caught the fluorescent light, and then she said it, the line she'd been rehearsing since the delivery room. This baby can't be our blood. She said it the way you'd read a verdict. No heat, no tremor, just the cold certainty of a woman who'd spent 10 days building a case in her head and was now delivering the closing argument. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a pause between sentences, the airless silence of a room where everyone has stopped breathing at the same instant. I watched the words strike each face like a stone dropped into a separate pool. Brooke nodded once, slowly, confirming. Carol's hand tightened around her phone. Greg looked at the table. Patty pressed her lips together and stared into her lap. The uncles shifted in their chairs. And Daniel. Daniel stood very still beside me, holding Luna's carrier with both hands, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his mother's shoulder. He looked confused. I knew he wasn't. He was deciding how to carry what he knew, how to let it enter the room without burning everything to the ground. Diane waited for the tears, for the shouting, for the dramatic exit she'd scripted in her head, the guilty woman fleeing, the family rallying, the pearls passed down one day to Brooke's future daughter with the Caldwell name intact. None of it came. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a challenge. The smile of someone who's been holding an answer in both hands and finally gets to set it down on the table. "Thank you, Diane," I said, "for asking the question." The door opened behind us. Dr. Naomi Hartley stepped through it with a manila envelope and the professional calm of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times. She closed the door, took her seat at the end of the table, and looked out over the room full of Caldwells. "Actually," she said, "there's something you all need to know." Naomi opened the envelope without ceremony. She drew out 2 reports, both printed on GenPath letterhead, both stamped with chain of custody seals. She laid them side by side on the table where everyone could see. "I'll start with the paternity analysis," she said. The DNA of Daniel Caldwell was compared against the DNA of Luna Caldwell across 21 standard genetic loci. She paused just long enough for the room to register what she was about to say. Combined paternity index, greater than 1 million. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. Daniel Caldwell is the biological father of Luna Caldwell. There is no ambiguity. She looked up. Luna is Daniel's daughter. The room shifted. Carol lowered her phone. One of the uncles exhaled audibly. Patty unclenched her hands. Brooke's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Diane. Diane didn't move. She sat at the head of the table with her pearls and her posture and her certainty. And for the first time in 10 days, something in her expression cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Just enough to let the confusion in. "Well," she said. Her voice was thinner now. "Fine. The paternity is settled. But the grandmother panel. You ran the grandmother panel too. That will show the bloodline." She said bloodline the way a person grips a railing on a high staircase. Tightly, because letting go means falling. Naomi nodded. "I did. The grandparentage analysis compared the DNA of Diane Caldwell against the DNA of Luna Caldwell to determine the probability of a biological grandparent-grandchild relationship." The fluorescent light hummed. Luna stirred in her carrier. Daniel's hand found mine under the table. I held it. "The result," Naomi said, "was an exclusion." The word landed in the room like a glass dropped on tile. Diane Caldwell is excluded as the biological grandmother of Luna Caldwell. The probability of a grandparental relationship is less than 0.01%. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke. Then Diane leaned forward. "That's impossible," she said. "If Danny is the father, then I'm the grandmother. That's how it works." Her voice had the brittle quality of a person who's just been told the foundation of their house has a crack and is insisting the house is fine. Naomi folded her hands. "If Daniel is confirmed as Luna's biological father and Maren is confirmed as Luna's biological mother, which she is, then a grandmaternity exclusion means one thing. The tested grandmother does not share a biological relationship with the tested father." Diane's face went white. "What are you saying?" Naomi looked at me. She was handing me the floor. Not because she couldn't explain it, she could, but because she understood that this moment belonged to the person who had asked the question. I turned to face Diane. My voice was steady, my hands were still. 12 years of delivering results I couldn't soften had given me a tone that sounds almost gentle, even when the words are a hammer. The test confirmed Luna is Daniel's biological daughter, I said. That means I was faithful. There was no affair. There was never an affair. I let that land. Diane's mouth opened. But the grandparentage test also showed that you are not biologically related to Daniel, I continued. There are several possible explanations for that, but based on the allele data and the fact that Daniel was born at Grayson County General, a small rural hospital before standardized ID bans, the findings are consistent with the newborn identification error. I paused. Dr. Hartley has already recommended a follow-up panel with Brooke to confirm, and we've requested the hospital's archived records. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of something breaking. You're right, Diane. She isn't your blood. I paused. Neither is he. Diane stood so fast her chair struck the wall behind her. That's a lie, she said. Her voice climbed high and jagged, nothing like the controlled register she'd used 5 minutes earlier. That lab is wrong. You tampered with it. You work at this hospital. You could have done anything. The test was run by an independent AABB-accredited laboratory, Naomi said. Chain of custody was maintained from collection to analysis. The results are not in dispute. I don't care about your chain of custody. Diane's hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the table as if the room had begun to tilt. Danny is my son. I carried him. I gave birth to him. I was there. Mrs. Caldwell. Naomi's voice stayed level. Nobody is disputing that you raised Daniel. Nobody is questioning your role as his mother. What the test indicates is a biological discrepancy consistent with a hospital-level identification error. Diane turned to Daniel. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was rigid. The face of a woman choosing between grief and rage, and landing on rage, because rage was the more familiar of the two. Danny, tell them. Tell them I'm your mother. Daniel looked at her. I watched his throat work. You are my mother, he said. You raised me. I'm not arguing with that. Then tell her to throw those results in the trash. I can't do that, Mom, because they're true. Brooke had gone pale. Her arms were no longer crossed. They hung at her sides as though they'd been unplugged. Carol's phone lay face down on the table, forgotten. The uncles stared at the far wall. And Diane looked around the room she'd built, the audience she'd assembled, the stage she'd set for my humiliation, and understood that every light was now pointing at her. What happened next was quieter than I expected. Diane sank back into her chair. Not dramatically, just slowly, the way a person sits down when their legs stop cooperating. The pearls rose and fell with her breathing. When I married Robert, she said, almost to herself, his mother told me I wasn't good enough. She said I came from nothing. She said the Caldwell name would carry me and I should be grateful every single day. She wasn't looking at anyone now. She was looking at the table. I spent 40 years proving her wrong. I kept the house. I kept the name. I kept the legacy. Her hands found the pearls. And now you're telling me the son I built it all around isn't even... She stopped. Daniel moved toward her. He knelt beside her chair, the way you'd kneel beside someone who'd fallen. Mom, he said, you raised me. You made me lunches and drove me to practice and yelled at the umpire when he called me out at second base. That's real. That's not something a test can take away. Diane looked at him for 1 second. Just one. Something soft moved behind her eyes, the briefest crack in the fortress. and then it closed. Her face hardened. She lifted the pearls off her neck and set them on the table with a click. "This is your fault," she said to me, not shouting now, colder than shouting. "You did this to my family." "I answered the question you asked," I said, "and the question you should have asked a long time ago." She stood, walked past Daniel without touching him, past Brooke, who was crying silently, past Carol, who didn't even look up, and out the door. She didn't slam it, she just left. The pearls lay on the table, glowing dully under the fluorescent light, belonging to no one. The room emptied slowly, the way water drains from a sink, in no particular order, with small pauses and awkward currents. Brooke left first, red-eyed, without a word to anyone. Greg followed her, keys already in his hand. Carol gathered her phone and her water bottle and her balloon of confidence and shuffled out behind the uncles, who held the door for her like pallbearers. Patty stopped by my chair. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." I nodded. I didn't yet know what to say to that. "Doctor." Hartley left the reports on the table and excused herself with a kind of professional restraint that only comes from years of watching families absorb the unbearable. She squeezed my shoulder on her way out. Daniel sat in the chair beside me, Luna's carrier between his feet. He stared at the pearls his mother had left behind. Neither of us touched them. "She'll call," he said, "eventually. I know it won't be an apology." I know that too. In the weeks that followed, things settled into the shape of a new normal. Diane didn't call. Not Daniel, not me, not anyone. Carol reported that she'd retreated to her room and refused visitors. Brooke sent Daniel a single text. "I don't know what to say." He didn't respond. Dr. Hartley filed a formal records request with Grayson County General, or what was left of it since the hospital had been absorbed into a regional health system back in 2003. The records were archived, incomplete, and would take months to review. Somewhere out there, Diane's biological child, now a 40-year-old stranger, had grown up in a different family under a different name, never knowing the Caldwells existed at all. And Daniel, who had always felt like a guest in his own bloodline, finally understood why. I put the pearls in a box and stored them in the hall closet. Not thrown away, not kept close, just set aside, the way you set aside a question you've already answered. 3 weeks later, Daniel drove to Diane's house alone. He was there for an hour. When he came back, he sat in the driveway for a long time before he came inside. "She's not ready," he said. "She says the hospital must have made a mistake with the test, not with me. She says she'll look into it." I didn't argue. "I told her we love her," he said, "and that Luna is her granddaughter by every measure that counts, but that she owes you an apology before she ever steps into our home again." He paused. She didn't take that well. I didn't expect her to. We stood in the kitchen. Luna was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. I opened the drawer where I keep Luna's keepsakes, her first hat, her going home outfit, a card from the nurses at Ridgemont, and at the very bottom, folded carefully in tissue paper, her hospital ID. Caldwell, Luna. I held it up. The plastic was thin and already yellowing at the edges. The kind of band they didn't have at Grayson County General in 1986. The only band that had ever told the truth about who she belonged to. Blood tells you where you came from. It never once told anyone where they belong. That part you choose. That's my story. One cruel sentence in a hospital room, and a truth nobody saw coming. If this reminded you that family is something you choose, not something you're tested for, take that with you today. Hold the people who chose you a little closer. And if this touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.